She was humiliated, kicked out of her father's wedding, but no one knew she was his lost daughter, a girl thought dead for 9 years. This is her incredible story of survival and revenge. Amara had been through hell, living on the streets, desperate and alone. Then, one fateful day, she walked into the grand ballroom of a billion-dollar wedding. The bride's cruel actions would send shockwaves through the entire event, but no one knew the truth. Amara wasn't just a beggar. She was the groom's long-lost daughter, the one they had buried in their hearts for a decade. Betrayed, humiliated, and fighting for her identity, Amara would uncover a deadly conspiracy that would change everything. Before we dive deeper into this intense journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For 9 years, Amara's family believed she was dead. She had been kidnapped when she was just 12, taken from the lush estate of her billionaire father, Charles Donovan. Her life was stolen from her in the blink of an eye. What followed was a nightmare. A life on the streets, survival against all odds. No one knew where she had gone. No one suspected she was still alive. As the years dragged on, Amara's name faded from the headlines, and her father, once an indomitable force in the world of business, slowly let go of the hope that his daughter would ever come back. The memory of her became nothing more than an echo in the halls of his sprawling mansion, a ghost of a life once filled with laughter and love. But for Amara, the nightmare was just beginning. Taken from the safety of her home, she was thrust into the cruel world of the forgotten, the ignored, the ones left to fend for themselves. With nothing but the clothes on her back, Amara was forced to navigate a world where survival was the only rule and kindness was a rare commodity. Day after day, she struggled to find food, shelter, and even a shred of hope. She slept under bridges, huddled in alleyways, and scavenged through dumpsters just to get by. She was invisible, lost in the sea of countless others who had fallen through the cracks of society. Yet despite it all, there was a flicker of something within her that refused to die. A spark that whispered to her that one day she would find her way home. She remembered the garden, the scent of fresh roses and the sound of birds chirping in the distance. She could still picture her father's smiling face, the warmth of his arms around her, holding her close. She remembered her mother's gentle lullabies, the way they would fill the house with love and comfort, like a safety net around her fragile heart. But with each passing year, those memories began to fade. They slipped through her fingers, like sand in the wind, leaving her with little more than the haunting ache of what could have been. Amara, now a shell of the girl she once was, didn't have much left except the flickering memories of a happier life, a life stolen from her. She had become a survivor, hardened by years of hardship, but still, somewhere deep inside, there was the child she once was, still yearning for the family she had lost. The world she now lived in was nothing like the one she remembered. But the pain of her separation, the loss of everything she had once held dear, continued to gnaw at her. She never gave up the belief that one day somehow she would find her way back. But as the years went by, so did the hope of ever returning home. Until one day, everything changed. Adabio Andrews, once a titan of industry, had long ago resigned himself to grief after the disappearance of his daughter. He had spent years locked in a silent battle, one where every day felt like an eternity of mourning. The world around him had moved on, but he had remained frozen in time, the memory of his daughter, Amara, haunting him like a shadow. Despite his success, the wealth, the power, the accolades, nothing could fill the emptiness left by her loss. And then, after almost a decade of heartache, he made a decision. He was going to try and move forward. He was going to marry again. Rodina was the woman he chose. She was everything his late wife had not been. Where his first wife had been soft-spoken, gentle, and reserved, Rodina was ambitious, confident, and beautiful in a way that commanded attention. She had a magnetic personality, a grace that seemed to pull people in, yet there was something sharp beneath her polished exterior. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and she was not afraid to go after it. A perfect match for Adabio, or so he thought. As the wedding day approached, the air was thick with anticipation. The venue was nothing short of spectacular, a sprawling estate decorated with millions of dollars worth of flowers, gold accents, and crystal chandeliers. The scent of fresh roses mingled with the sharp, clean scent of expensive perfume as guests milled about, marveling at the extravagance. The guests were dressed to the nines, their laughter and chatter filling the air. But amid all the luxury and opulence, one person stood apart. Rodina walked down the aisle, her bridal gown a vision of pure elegance, her smile one of victory. The camera captured her smug, satisfied expression as she glided past rows of guests, each one captivated by her beauty and presence. She was the bride of a billionaire, about to marry the man of her dreams. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, manipulating, persuading, and convincing everyone around her that she was the perfect woman for Adabio. And now she was about to claim her prize. But outside the gates of the grand estate, a different story was unfolding. The distant hum of the celebration was drowned out by the heavy, labored breaths of a young woman who had walked miles to get here. A fragile figure, barefoot, ragged and exhausted, clutched a crumpled wedding invitation in her hand. The invitation, yellowed from age, was a reminder of a life she had once known, a life she had once belonged to, a life she thought was lost forever. Amara had found her father's wedding. Her heart raced as she stood there at the gates, staring at the grand mansion before her. She had walked through countless streets, begging for scraps, but now, after all these years, she was standing at the doorstep of the family she had been torn from. She felt the weight of the moment in her chest, the tightness of the invitation in her hand, the only piece of the past she had left. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the gate. She had no shoes. Her clothes were torn and stained, her face gaunt from years of hardship. But it didn't matter. This was the moment that would define everything. She had come to claim her place, to face the man who was once her father, and to confront the woman who had now claimed everything that should have been hers. Amara walked slowly toward the ballroom, her heart pounding in her ears. She was nervous, but there was a sense of urgency to her every step, as though the entire world was waiting for her to make her move. The music from inside the ballroom grew louder as she approached, the sound of a grand piano playing a slow, haunting melody that seemed to echo her emotions. And then she stepped inside. The room fell silent as she entered, her presence causing an immediate stir. Heads turned, whispers filled the air, and the tension was palpable. Guests paused mid-conversation, unsure of what to make of the disheveled woman who had just walked in. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and then the bride, Rodina, turned her head, her gaze landing on the unexpected guest. The shock in her eyes was immediate, followed by a cold, calculating look of disdain. This was her moment, her wedding day, and this girl, this ragged intruder, was about to ruin it all. Rodina's smile faded, her perfectly manicured hands twitching with barely contained anger. She straightened her posture, her eyes narrowing. There was a flicker of recognition in her expression, but she quickly masked it with a sneer. "Who let this woman in here?" Rodina's voice was sharp, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. Her eyes never left Amara, and her face twisted in disgust. Amara stood her ground, every inch of her trembling body screaming for acknowledgement, for recognition. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if it was fear, shock, or something else entirely that made it so hard to find her voice. But then a flicker of memory broke through the chaos. Her father's voice, soft and reassuring. "You're my daughter, and I'll always protect you." But Rodina was having none of it. With a swift, dismissive gesture, she turned to the staff and barked, "Get her out of here, now!" The guests watched, horrified and confused, as Amara was ushered out of the ballroom, her head spinning, her heart breaking. She wasn't even allowed to speak. She wasn't even given a chance to explain. As the heavy doors of the ballroom closed behind her, Amara's thoughts raced. Was it really possible? Could it be that after all these years, after everything she had suffered, she was still being rejected by the one person who should have known her? Could he really have forgotten her that easily? But as Amara stepped forward, the bride with a sneer did the unthinkable. Rodina's reaction was one of rage. How dare this woman, this girl, ruin her perfect day? This was supposed to be the moment she had dreamed of, the culmination of years of meticulous planning, manipulation, and ambition. She wasn't going to let some ragged, unkempt girl stand in her way now. The wedding was supposed to be a fairy tale, her fairy tale, and no one, not even a long-lost daughter, was going to steal that from her. With a cold, imperious tone, Rodina's voice echoed through the hall. "Get her out of here!" she screamed, her face twisted with disgust. She barely looked at Amara, as though her presence was nothing more than an unpleasant stain on her perfect day. "I don't know who you think you are, but you do not belong here." The guests watched in stunned silence, some unsure of what was happening, others murmuring nervously among themselves. The sound of Rodina's harsh command reverberated through the grand ballroom. Every eye in the room was fixed on Amara, who stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like 1,000 bricks. Amara's heart raced. She could feel the eyes of everyone around her, judging her, mocking her. But there was one thing she knew for certain. She wasn't going to leave without being heard. She wasn't some street beggar. She wasn't an outsider. She had every right to be there. She had every right to stand in front of the man who was once her father and demand the truth. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she lifted her voice, raw, shaking, and filled with the pain of 9 long years. "I'm not just some beggar," she cried, her voice cracking. "I'm your daughter." The words echoed in the hall, a desperate plea that hung in the air like a ghost. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. Some exchanged bewildered glances, while others looked away, embarrassed by the confrontation. But no one came to her defense. They all stared at her, wide-eyed, as if she were some sort of apparition. Amara's eyes searched the room, her heart beating faster as she locked eyes with the man she had once called father. But he didn't respond. There was no flicker of recognition in his eyes, no sign that he remembered the little girl he had raised, the one who had once clung to him for comfort, for love. He just stood there, frozen in place, his face a mask of confusion and something else, something colder. His gaze flicked briefly to Rodina, and in that moment, Amara felt the crushing realization hit her. He was choosing her over me. He wasn't just ignoring her words. He was dismissing them entirely. He wasn't going to listen. The man who had once promised to protect her now couldn't even look her in the eye. "No," Amara thought. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." Her world seemed to crumble around her. She felt like a shadow, unseen, forgotten, a ghost in the very house that should have been her sanctuary. How was this possible? How had she gone from being the light of this man's life to a complete stranger, a person he couldn't even acknowledge? As the staff closed in on her, grabbing her arms with brutal force, Amara tried to pull away, but the grip of reality was too strong. Her body was physically pulled from the room, her legs stumbling beneath her as the guards dragged her across the marble floors. "Please," she pleaded, her voice growing weaker. "I'm telling the truth. I'm his daughter. Don't you see?" But her words were drowned out by the sound of the wedding guests gossiping, their whispers growing louder as they watched the spectacle unfold. Some seemed horrified, others disinterested, and a few appeared downright entertained by the drama. They were witnessing something that was almost too unbelievable to comprehend. A girl, once thought dead, claiming to be the daughter of a billionaire, barging into his wedding, and now being escorted out by force. To them, it was nothing more than a spectacle. Amara's heart broke as she was thrown out into the street, her body colliding with the cold pavement. Her vision blurred with tears as the doors to the ballroom slammed shut behind her, the laughter and music fading into the distance. The weight of the rejection crushed her, heavier than anything she had ever felt in her life. Was she really just a ghost to him? Had she been forgotten? She had spent so many years dreaming of this moment, rehearsing the words she would say, imagining the reunion that would take place when she finally found her father. And yet, here she was, abandoned again, alone in the dark, with nothing but the sound of her heart shattering. She stood on the cold sidewalk, her feet bare and bleeding from the harsh stone beneath her, the weight of the years pressing down on her shoulders. How could he not remember me, she thought, the question echoing in her mind. She had thought that once she was in front of him, he would see her, he would know her. But instead, she was nothing, just another stranger, lost in the crowd. Her voice caught in her throat as she wiped the tears from her eyes. The world around her felt like it was spinning out of control, a nightmare she couldn't escape from. Was this really her life now? A life of constant rejection, never truly belonging anywhere? No family, no love, no home. And yet, even in that moment of complete despair, a small, stubborn spark of hope remained. There had to be more to this. There had to be more to her story. She couldn't be dismissed like this. She wouldn't be. But as Amara was thrown out into the street, she felt her heart break. Was she really just a ghost to him? Had she been forgotten? Rodina didn't know it, but her world was about to shatter. Amara wasn't just a beggar. She was the daughter Adabio Andrews had mourned for years, and now, after a decade of pain, she was back to reclaim what was hers. As Amara walked away from the estate, every step felt heavier than the last. Her heart was shattered, but her resolve was stronger than ever. The gates behind her seemed to close not just on her father's wedding, but on the life she had once known. She walked down the path, her mind racing, filled with the echoing disbelief of her rejection. How could she have been forgotten so easily? Meanwhile, in the quiet of his study, Adabio sat alone, the weight of his years pressing down on him. He stared at the old photographs on his desk, the pictures of his daughter when she was young, vibrant, and full of life. He traced his fingers over the worn edges of a family portrait, the one that had been taken before everything had changed. A silence hung in the room, thick with nostalgia, but also something else, something he couldn't quite place. His eyes flicked back to the photo, and his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the photo that had done it, but the memory it had triggered. He had seen those eyes before, those same deep, searching eyes. The eyes of the girl who had been taken from him, the one he thought was lost forever. The realization hit him like a freight train, knocking the air from his lungs. His daughter, his little girl, Amara, was alive. A cold wave of panic flooded through him. How could this be possible? He had watched her disappear, believed her to be dead. Every part of him had grieved for her, but now, standing here in the quiet of his study, he couldn't deny it. The girl from the wedding, the one he had turned away, was his daughter, the one he had buried in his heart all these years, the one he had never truly let go of. But then came the hardest question of all. Why didn't he recognize her? Had so many years of pain and grief really clouded his memory that much? Or was it something deeper, something darker at play? His mind raced, and for the first time in a long time, his tears weren't of sorrow, but of confusion. The storm was only beginning. As the truth about Amara's identity began to unravel, a new layer of darkness emerged. The past hadn't been just a tragedy. It had been a carefully crafted lie, A conspiracy that would shake everything he thought he knew about his family. A conspiracy that would change everything. The confrontation was inevitable. Adabio, finally facing the truth, summoned Amara back. But the moment wasn't as sweet as she had imagined. She stood there, face to face with the man she had spent years dreaming about finding, but the anger she felt toward him was hard to shake. How could he not have recognized me? Amara's heart ached as she looked at her father. His eyes were filled with regret, but she couldn't help but feel betrayed. Years of pain, of loneliness, did none of it matter to him? She wanted to forgive him, to collapse into his arms and feel the comfort of his embrace once again. But the scars ran deep. She had waited for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, it felt hollow. Across the room, Rodina watched with a twisted expression of jealousy and rage. She had seen this moment coming, the daughter who was supposed to be gone forever, now standing in her way. As the truth began to leak out, Rodina's grip on her carefully constructed world slipped. She couldn't let Amara win. She couldn't lose everything she had worked so hard to achieve. Rodina, sensing her control slipping, did everything she could to destroy Amara's credibility. She whispered lies into the ears of the guests, painting Amara as a fraud. She's just trying to manipulate him. She's a con artist. But Adabio, now furious, turned his back on the woman he was about to marry, the woman who had almost destroyed his family, and said, "This wedding is over." The words cut through the tension like a knife. In that moment, everything shifted. The life he had tried to rebuild was crumbling before his eyes, and there was no turning back. Rodina, having lost everything in a moment of pride and cruelty, was exposed for her malicious actions. Her carefully built empire of lies crumbled before her, and the guests who had once admired her now turned their backs. She had nothing left but her bitterness. But for Amara, this wasn't just about revenge. It was about healing, about finding her place in a family that had long thought her lost. As the dust settled, Amara stood in the arms of her father, feeling the weight of her years of pain finally begin to lift. It wasn't easy, and there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt the warmth of love, the safety of belonging. They began to rebuild what had been stolen from them. Slowly, surely, their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Amara's journey had been long and painful, but in the end, she had found the family she thought she'd lost forever. The emotional scars would take time to heal, but she was no longer alone. She was home. What would you have done if you were in Amara's shoes? Would you have stood your ground or walked away? Comment below and let us know. And remember, if you want to hear more powerful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Amara's story is one of survival, heartbreak, and the power of family, but it's also a reminder that no matter how dark life gets, there's always hope, always a chance for redemption. Amara found her way back from the depths of despair, and so can anyone who believes in the possibility of a second chance. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from revenge, but from the strength to heal and move forward. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all of the power of resilience, hope, and love.